The clock on the kitchen wall ticked slowly, its hands moving with the same stubborn rhythm it had kept for decades. The morning sun had already pushed its way through the lace curtains that Sarah had sewn in younger, happier days, spilling gold across the linoleum floor that had seen countless family meals and quiet evenings. The house itself had grown old with Hiram done. Every creak of the wooden beams, every scratch on the table spoke of a life lived with steadiness rather than grandeur. Hiram sat at that table, his glasses slipping low on the bridge of his nose. Before him lay his pension stubs, a handful of bills, and a calculator that had become a constant reminder of limits. At 65, his world was smaller than it once had been, trimmed down to routines. Morning coffee, evening walks, Sunday, phone calls from his daughter when she remembered. Since Sarah's passing, the silence of the house pressed against him in a way that sometimes felt heavier than age itself. The sound of heels broke that silence, sharp, rhythmic, out of place on the worn linoleum. His daughter Blanche stepped in her perfume preceding her, the scent more suited to a downtown boutique than this modest home. She carried herself with a brightness that seemed rehearsed, her designer jacket catching the light. Behind her came Simon Reed. Taller than most, broad-shouldered and dressed in a suit too sharp for a Saturday morning visit. He did not sit politely. Instead, he lowered himself into Hiram's recliner, leaning back as if testing ownership. The gleam of his watch caught the sunlight and flashed across the room. Dad, Blanche began, her tone dripping with warmth that felt staged. "We need to talk about something important." Hiram set down his mug, still half full of coffee gone cold. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Simon leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his smile practiced to charm. "We're counting on 50,000. This is our dream wedding." The words landed like a blow. Hiram blinked, certain he had misheard. 50,000. His pension barely stretched to cover groceries, utilities, the occasional doctor visit. His savings were a cushion meant to last the years ahead, not fuel a single day of celebration. Blanche's eyes filled with tears, sudden and shimmering. "Dad, this is my only chance. Simon's family has connections. Important people are coming. I can't look cheap." Hiram's throat tightened. "Sweetheart, weddings are costly, yes, but 50,000. Simon cut in, his tone sharpened. "My Uncle Donald always says a real man provides for his family's big moments." The word stung. A real man. Had he not spent 30 years teaching, saving, making sure his daughter had what she needed? Had he not stayed up late to help with school projects, worked extra hours to cover her college tuition? Blanche's tears slipped free, tracing lines down carefully made-up cheeks. She sank into a chair opposite him, her voice softening into something childlike. "If you love me, you'll find a way. Remember when I used to play dress-up in Mom's gown? You always promised me I'd have a wedding as beautiful as hers." The mention of Sarah was a twist of the knife. He pictured her standing in their small living room in her wedding dress, laughing as Blanche toddled around the hem years later. Sarah would have wanted their daughter happy, but Sarah also would have seen through this. Still, Hiram felt the walls closing in. The bills on the counter, the empty rooms, his daughter's pleading eyes. "I have about 30,000 in savings," he admitted slowly. "That's meant to last me, but—" Simon leaned back triumphant. 30 is a start. You can borrow the rest. Banks trust pensioners. At your age, what else are you going to spend it on?" Blanche rushed forward, flinging her arms around her father. "Oh, Dad, I knew you'd come through. You're the best father in the world." Her perfume enveloped him, sweet but cloying, masking the bitterness in his chest. Simon stood adjusting his jacket, already half distracted by his phone. "We'll need confirmation by next week. The venue won't hold the date without a deposit." Moments later, the front door closed. Their voices faded into the distance. The house returned to silence, heavier than before. Hiram sat alone, the warmth of his daughter's embrace already fading from his shoulders. He reached for the calculator again. 30,000 in savings, 20,000 more needed. The numbers blurred as he tapped them over and over, hoping for a different result. They never changed. He leaned back in the chair, the wood groaning softly, and stared at the old curtains Sarah had sewn. "All for her," he whispered to the empty kitchen. His hand moved to the phone book, his finger tracing down to the listing First National Bank. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. And in that small, ordinary kitchen, a father began to mortgage the last of his years for the happiness of a daughter who could no longer see his worth. The following week arrived heavy with gray skies and restless thoughts. Sleep had come in fragments for Hiram Dunn. He dozed in his recliner, jolted awake by the glow of late-night infomercials and the endless clicking of his calculator. 30,000 in savings. 20,000 more needed. The numbers marched through his mind as unrelenting as the tick of the kitchen clock. By morning he knew what he must do, though the choice felt like handing over the last piece of himself. Downtown First National Bank looked unchanged from decades past. The marble floors echoed with footsteps, the brass railings gleamed, and the high ceilings gave the space a hushed reverence, as though money itself demanded silence. Hiram pushed open the heavy glass door, clutching a folder of documents, pension records, savings statements, insurance papers. Each one a reminder of the life he had built carefully, bit by bit, only to dismantle it for a single day. The young woman at the front desk smiled politely, her professionalism crisp. "Good morning, sir. How can we help you today?" Hiram cleared his throat. I'd like to speak with someone about a loan." Her hands moved efficiently across the keyboard. "Of course. Mr. Dunn. Please have a seat. Mr. Martinez will assist you." The office was small but warm, decorated with family photos of a smiling wife and 2 young children. Carlos Martinez rose to shake his hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Mr. Dunn, come in. What brings you here today?" Hiram sat down carefully, setting his folder on the desk. His voice trembled, though he tried to steady it. "I need to borrow $20,000 for my daughter's wedding." Carlos nodded thoughtfully, typing into his computer. "I see you've been with us a long time. Your pension deposits are steady, your credit history solid. We can structure this in a way that works for you." "What would the payments be?" Hiram asked, his hands folded tightly in his lap. "At 7.9% interest spread over 5 years, you'd be looking at around $450 a month." The number struck hard. 450 was more than groceries, more than utilities. It meant no dinners out, no small luxuries. Perhaps not even enough for prescriptions if prices rose. But across his mind flickered the image of Blanche as a little girl twirling in Sarah's gown, giggling as the fabric pooled at her feet. He nodded slowly. "I'll take it." The paperwork stretched across the desk, pages of terms, disclosures, warnings in small print. Carlos guided him patiently, as though sensing the weight of the decision. "Sign here, and here, and here." Each signature felt like a piece of his future slipping away. By the final page, his hand ached, but the loan was secured. Carlos offered a firm handshake. "The funds will be in your account Friday morning, Mr. Dunn. Congratulations to your daughter." "Thank you," Hiram murmured, though the word felt hollow. Friday morning, the notification appeared on his screen. Deposit processed. The account balance gleamed with a number higher than he had seen in years, though it came with a cost heavier than dollars. He dialed his daughter's number. Dad Blanche's voice burst through, bright with excitement. "Perfect timing. We'll come over at 3. At exactly 3, Blanche arrived in a rush of perfume and silk scarf, Simon close behind with his leather portfolio. They settled in the living room as though it were already theirs. Hiram placed the documents carefully on his lap. "I secured the full amount. 50,000. Simon raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. "How did you manage that?" "I drained my savings. Took a loan for the rest." His voice was calm, though his chest burned with the confession. "The money is available now." Blanche threw her arms around him, tears streaking her cheeks. "Dad, you've given me everything I dreamed of. You're amazing." Simon straightened his jacket. "Good. Then let's be clear. Guest list decisions are ours alone." Hiram hesitated. "I want to invite one person, someone who matters to me." Blanche pulled back, confusion clouding her joy. "Dad, the list is final." Simon's voice sharpened. "You're paying, but we decide. That's how weddings work. I'm asking for one seat, one place at a table already paid for." Blanche's voice cracked with sudden anger. "Stop trying to control this. It's selfish." Simon gathered his portfolio. "If you can't accept that, maybe you shouldn't come at all." Blanche's expression softened into pity, worse than anger. "Dad, don't make this harder. Just be happy for us." The door closed behind them, leaving the house still and heavy. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm of expenses and exclusion. At the florist's, Blanche chose arrangements that cost more than his monthly utilities. When he suggested simpler roses, she smiled tightly. "Dad, your taste is different." At the caterer's, Simon spread menus across the table, selecting dishes that exceeded Hiram's weekly grocery budget. "We don't want to look cheap in front of our friends." At the DJ's, Hiram offered the song he and Sarah had danced to. Simon cut it off mid-verse. "We want music that reflects us, not you." By April, the decisions were made without him. His role shrank to that of a silent checkbook. Then came the envelope, elegant and heavy, addressed in calligraphy, "Mr. Hiram Dunn." Not father of the bride, not honored guest. Just another name among 300. He set it on the table beneath the kitchen lamp, staring at the swirl of ink. "A guest?" he whispered into the empty room. "Only a guest at my own daughter's wedding." The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and the silence deepened around him. The morning of May 10th began with a quiet sky, the kind that seemed painted by careful hands. The air carried the softness of spring, cool enough for a jacket, warm enough to promise blossoms. Birds called from the maples lining the street, and sunlight pooled gently across the kitchen table where Hiram Dunn sat alone. He had risen before dawn, though sleep had never truly come. The night had been spent moving between his bed and his old recliner, his body restless with a mixture of anticipation and sorrow. By 6, he had laid out his suit on the bed, dark, well kept, though worn at the seams. The tie had been pressed the night before. He polished his shoes until they gleamed, even though the leather had begun to crack. On the dresser sat a photograph framed in oak, Sarah in her wedding dress holding a bouquet of white roses, her smile bright and steady. He touched the glass softly, whispering, "She walks without me today, Sarah. I wish you were here." By 1 o'clock, the streets around St. Matthew's Church were already lined with polished cars, sleek black sedans, glossy SUVs, a few gleaming sports cars that caught the afternoon sun. Hiram's old sedan rattled into a corner spot, its muffler groaning. He cut the engine and sat for a moment watching the stream of well-dressed guests move toward the church steps. They laughed easily, their clothes immaculate, their voices carrying the assurance of wealth. He smoothed his jacket, tugged at his tie, and finally stepped out. Inside, the sanctuary had been transformed into something radiant. White roses and lilies covered every surface, their fragrance heavy in the air. Stained glass windows spilled patterns of red and blue across polished wood. Candles burned in tall stands, their flames flickering against the vaulted ceiling. Organ music swelled deep and commanding, filling the space with solemn beauty. An usher approached with a polite but hurried smile. "Your name, sir?" "Hiram Dunn," he answered softly, expecting to be led to the front. The young man glanced at his list, nodded briskly, and gestured vaguely toward the back rows. "Anywhere here is fine." Hiram hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the front pews, places reserved for family, for fathers walking daughters down the aisle. But the usher had already turned to greet another guest. Hiram moved quietly to a seat halfway back behind a cluster of Simon's colleagues. Their suits were expensive, their laughter casual, as though the day belonged entirely to them. The organ shifted. Guests rose to their feet. At the far end of the aisle, Blanche appeared, framed in sunlight spilling through the great doors. Her dress shimmered like flowing water, her veil catching every colored fragment of light from the windows. She walked slowly, bouquet steady in her hands, her face shining with the glow of a bride. Hiram's throat tightened. For years he had imagined this moment differently. In his dreams, Blanche held his arm, whispering how much she loved him as they moved together down the aisle. Instead, she walked alone, her eyes fixed on Simon at the altar. She passed his pew, without so much as a glance, as though he were one of the 300 nameless guests. The ceremony unfolded with elegance. The officiant spoke of love, of commitment, of honoring families, and building new bonds. The words rang hollow in Hiram's ears. When Simon promised to honor the family that shaped her, the phrase pierced him like a blade. He lowered his eyes to the hymn book resting in his lap, tracing the worn edges of its pages with trembling fingers. Blanche's voice carried clearly as she repeated her vows strong and certain. Simon's voice followed smooth and confident. Rings were exchanged, and the officiant's words echoed through the vaulted ceiling, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Applause broke like thunder. Guests cheered, cameras flashed, phones captured every second. Hiram clapped politely, his smile faint, though his heart ached with the weight of absence. The recessional began the wedding party filing past with radiant faces. For a brief moment, Blanche's eyes brushed against his. Her smile was genuine, but it was not for him. It was the radiant smile of a bride on her perfect day, shared with everyone and no one in particular. Guests spilled into the aisles, voices, bright congratulations flying through the air. They hurried toward the steps, eager to pose for photographs and share laughter in the spring sunlight. Hiram remained seated until the church was nearly empty. The organ fell silent, and the last of the candles flickered low. Slowly, he rose, his knees stiff, and walked toward a side door. Outside, the air was cool and fragrant with blossoms. From the front steps came laughter and applause, the click of cameras, the cheers of friends. Blanche and Simon posed together, framed by roses and smiles, surrounded by the people they wanted to impress. Hiram slipped quietly to his car, starting the old sedan with a reluctant groan. He sat for a long moment, hands resting on the wheel. "I should have been beside her, Sarah," he whispered. Then with the rattle of the engine, he joined the line of luxury cars winding toward Oakwood Manor, where the celebration would continue without him. The drive to Oakwood Manor took no more than 15 minutes, but for Hiram it stretched like an hour. The line of cars ahead glittered in the afternoon sun. Mercedes BMWs, sleek sedans, and black SUVs. His old sedan chugged along among them, its paint dulled by years, its muffler rattling against the hum of engines worth more than his entire home. Each turn of the road tightened something inside him. When the manor finally rose into view, it was like a vision torn from a glossy magazine. Limestone columns reached toward the sky, their surfaces glowing gold under the late sun. Manicured gardens framed the entrance, blossoms arranged with precision, their colors spilling like paint across the lawns. Beyond the tall glass windows, crystal chandeliers glittered with a brilliance that seemed almost cold. Hiram parked in the farthest corner away from the procession of polished vehicles and sat for a long moment before stepping out. Inside, the air was alive with sound and light. Guests clustered in groups, their laughter ringing against marble floors, their voices carrying confidence. Servers glided smoothly, trays balanced effortlessly, offering champagne in tall flutes and hors d'oeuvres arranged like tiny sculptures. The smell of roasted meats and fresh herbs mingled with perfume and cologne. A string quartet played in the corner, their music weaving elegance into the chatter. Hiram accepted a glass of whiskey from a passing tray and moved toward the edge of the ballroom, content to stand in the shadows. He watched his daughter, radiant in her gown, drifting through clusters of well-wishers. She laughed brightly, her arm looped through Simon's. To anyone else, she looked like the picture of joy. To Hiram, she looked further away than she had ever been. Everyone. Simon's voice cut through the noise, smooth and commanding. He had drawn a circle of young professionals around him, his smile wide. "I'd like you to meet my father-in-law." Dozens of faces turned toward Hiram. He forced a small smile, lifting his glass in a polite nod. Simon pressed on. A real hero. He drained his savings and even took out a loan so we could have this perfect evening. Laughter rippled through the group, some genuine, others uneasy. A woman in sequins gasped lightly. How generous! Hiram's cheeks burned. He shifted his glass, wishing suddenly that the floor might open and swallow him whole. But Simon wasn't finished. And get this, he even thought that paying gave him the right to make demands. Can you believe it? He wanted to invite some mystery guest like this day was about him. The laughter grew louder. Blanche touched Simon's arm gently, her smile flickering, but she did not stop him. Simon grinned, emboldened. Don't worry, we set him straight. Our wedding, our rules." Around them, guests chuckled, though some exchanged uncertain glances. The music continued, but the warmth of it faltered. At the head table, a man sat silently, silver hair gleaming beneath the chandeliers. Donald Reed. His presence carried a weight different from the others. He had built a small empire of restaurants in the city, a man accustomed to being respected wherever he went. Simon had spoken of him often, the uncle whose approval he seemed to crave more than anything. At the mention of Hiram's name, Donald's expression had shifted. He lowered his fork with deliberate care, his gaze moving across the room until it settled on the older man sitting alone at the edge of the ballroom. His eyes lingered there, sharp and searching. Dinner was served in courses, each more extravagant than the last. Plates arrived with filet mignon arranged like artwork, vegetables carved into perfect shapes, sauces painted across porcelain. The aromas filled the air, rich and heavy, but Hiram tasted little. He sat quietly at a back table, chewing slowly, sipping his whiskey in small sips. The laughter from the front of the room carried toward him, sharper now, each note striking like a reminder of where he stood. Poor man had to borrow just to cover this. Simon's voice rang out again, clear and mocking, and he thought money bought him a say. Guests laughed, though less heartily this time. Several shifted in their seats, glancing toward Hiram with discomfort. Donald Reed, however, had gone completely still. He set his knife and fork down on the linen, folding his hands in front of him. His eyes never left Simon, then shifted again toward Hiram. The chandeliers glittered above, scattering light across polished silver and crystal glasses. The music swelled faintly, but the air in the ballroom had changed. A tension hummed beneath the laughter, subtle but unmistakable. Hiram finished his drink, placing the empty glass carefully on the table. He sat straighter, though the ache in his chest grew heavier with each passing moment. The humiliation had become a weight, almost unbearable. Yet across the room he could see something building in Donald Reed's expression, something that suggested the night was far from finished. And as Simon rose to his feet, lifting his glass for another toast, the room seemed to draw in a breath, waiting for the moment that would break the silence once and for all. Dessert plates were being cleared, the soft clink of silverware against china filling the brief lull before the next round of speeches. Waitstaff moved quietly, their trays balanced with practiced grace, while the guests leaned back in their chairs, laughter and wine loosening the edges of formality. The chandeliers glowed warmer now, their light softened by the hour yet to Hiram. The room felt colder with each passing minute. The master of ceremonies tapped his glass, the sound ringing clear across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, the groom would now like to say a few words." Polite applause rose as Simon stood, cheeks flushed from wine and triumph. He smoothed his tuxedo jacket and strode to the microphone at the front of the hall. His smile gleamed as though the spotlight itself had chosen him. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who believed the room belonged to him. "This has been a perfect day, a dream come true. I want to thank my beautiful bride, our friends, and especially my father-in-law." Another ripple of applause, though lighter this time. Hiram lowered his gaze to the tablecloth, bracing himself. "Now let me tell you about commitment," Simon continued, his tone shifting toward performance. "How many fathers would empty their life savings for their daughter's wedding?" Laughter broke across several tables, though uncertain in tone. Simon raised his hand theatrically, but that wasn't enough. This man, he gestured toward the back where Hiram sat, even took out a loan at 65 years old. "That's real dedication, isn't it?" Scattered chuckles. A few murmurs. Some guests glanced toward Hiram with sympathetic eyes, others with poorly hidden pity. "And get this," Simon pressed on, enjoying the sound of his own voice. He thought that paying meant he could control things. Tried to set conditions. Wanted to invite some mystery guest, as if our wedding was about him. His laughter rang out sharp, cutting through the room. The laughter this time faltered. Guests shifted in their seats. Even Blanche's smile wavered, her eyes darting nervously toward the head table. That was when it happened. A sudden scrape echoed as a chair was pushed back from the head table. The sound was sharp, final. Donald Reed, tall and silver-haired, rose to his feet. He set his champagne glass down with deliberate force, the liquid sloshing over the rim and staining the white linen. The entire room seemed to still. "Stop!" Donald's voice rang out deep and commanding. Simon froze at the microphone, confusion flashing across his face. "Uncle Don?" "Give me the microphone," Donald cut in his tone absolute. The younger man hesitated, his hand trembling slightly as he extended the microphone toward his uncle. Donald took it with steady fingers, rising to his full height. The ballroom fell silent. The waitstaff stopped mid-step. The string quartet lowered their bows. 300 guests turned as one toward the man whose presence suddenly filled every corner of the room. Donald's voice carried with the weight of truth. "There is something you all need to know." The air seemed to thicken, anticipation pressing down on every table. 32 years ago, there was a fire on Maple Street. A terrible blaze. A young couple lost their lives, leaving behind a 2-year-old boy trapped upstairs. Gasps rippled softly. Older guests exchanged glances, some nodding faintly, as if remembering. The fire department had not yet arrived. Neighbors stood helpless. But one man, a stranger, did not hesitate. He ran into the flames, fought through smoke and heat, and carried that child out just before the roof collapsed. Donald paused, his voice steady but rich with emotion. That man was Hiram Dunn. All eyes swung toward the back of the room. Hiram sat stiffly, his hands trembling against his lap. He had not expected this, had never spoken of that night in 3 decades. His scarred hands, usually hidden beneath long sleeves, suddenly felt exposed, glowing under the weight of so many eyes. And that child, Donald's voice broke slightly. "Was you, Simon?" The words struck like thunder. Simon's face drained of color. His champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the polished floor. He staggered back, collapsing into his chair. His head fell into his hands, shoulders shaking. Donald's voice grew louder, burning with righteous anger. "For 32 years, this man carried the scars of saving your life. He asked for nothing. Tonight, I have watched you mock him, belittle him, humiliate him in front of strangers. Without him, you would not stand here, not as a groom, not as anything at all." A stunned silence followed. Guests exchanged horrified glances. Their laughter now turned to shame. Blanche's eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at her father, the truth dawning painfully across her face. Simon rose unsteadily, his legs weak. He stumbled toward Hiram, collapsing onto his knees before him. "Please," he choked, his voice breaking. "Please forgive me. I didn't know. I never knew." The ballroom held its breath. Hiram rose slowly, his knees protesting, his chest heavy. He looked down at the man who had mocked him, now broken like a child before him. His voice was quiet, yet it carried across the room. "You didn't know, but now you do. Stand up, son. Be better than you were. That is how you repay me." Simon clutched his hand, tears streaking his face. The room erupted in thunderous applause. 300 guests rose to their feet, their glasses lifted high, voices shouting in unison, "To Hiram." For the first time that night, Hiram felt the weight of humiliation lift from his shoulders, replaced by the light of long-delayed truth. The applause lingered in the ballroom, like a wave that refused to fade. Glasses clinked, chairs shifted, as 300 people stood together, their voices echoing one name, "To Hiram." The chandeliers glittered overhead, scattering light like falling stars. For the first time in many years, Hiram Dunn did not shrink from the attention. He stood quietly, his scarred hands folded, his face lined with both sorrow and relief, as though the truth had finally unburdened him. Simon remained kneeling, tears streaming unchecked, his voice raw. "I can never undo what I said, what I did. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to live worthy of what you gave me." Hiram reached down, gripping the young man's trembling hand and lifting him gently to his feet. His voice was calm, steady. "Then stand tall. Live better. That is enough." Blanche rushed forward, her gown whispering against the polished floor. She threw her arms around her father, her tears wetting his shoulder. "Dad, I am so sorry. I should have seen you all along. I love you. I'm proud of you." For a moment, time collapsed, the years of childhood laughter, the quiet evenings when Sarah read bedtime stories, the afternoons spent helping with school projects. All of it pressed back into Hiram's chest as he held his daughter close. The ache of betrayal softened, replaced by something gentler. Forgiveness, fragile, yet real. Donald Reed lowered the microphone, his gaze fixed on Hiram with deep respect. The guests remained hushed, as though reluctant to disturb the sacredness of what had just unfolded. Even the musicians set down their instruments, their silence honoring the moment. The spell broke slowly. Music began again, softer now, a lilting melody from the string quartet. Servers moved quietly, refilling glasses. Guests whispered to one another, their faces softened with humility. No one looked at Hiram with pity now. They looked at him with awe. Later, Blanche tugged gently at his hand. "Dad, will you dance with me?" He hesitated, his old knees stiff, his heart still heavy. Yet when she guided him onto the floor, the crowd parted in silence. The music swelled, something gentle, something timeless. They moved slowly, father and daughter, her veil brushing against his cheek. Around them, 300 guests watched with softened eyes. For many, the chandeliers and flowers blurred away, leaving only the sight of a father reclaiming his place in his daughter's heart. Simon soon joined them, not to interrupt, but to stand near his head, bowed, his hand resting lightly on Blanche's shoulder, as if to promise his own share of contrition. Hiram met his eyes. In them he saw not arrogance, but a brokenness that might one day shape itself into wisdom. When the dance ended, the applause returned, gentler, this time more intimate. Simon raised his glass once more, his voice trembling, yet sincere. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I was shown what true strength looks like. Not wealth, not pride, but dignity and grace. To the man who gave me life twice, once when he carried me from fire, and again tonight through forgiveness. To Hiram Dunn." Every guest lifted their glass. The cry rang out again, strong and unified. To Hiram. Hiram lifted his own glass slightly, his eyes drifting across the room to Simon, chastened but humbled, to Blanche, her face shining with love, and to the empty space in his heart where Sarah still lived. He felt her presence as surely as he had the night she wore her wedding dress, laughing in the living room. He imagined her smile, now proud and gentle. The chandeliers glittered above. The music filled the hall. And in that moment, Hiram knew that humiliation had not defined him. His quiet courage, his patience, his grace, that was what endured. The night ended not with shame, but with light. The truth had spoken at last, and in its glow the bonds of family were mended, fragile, yet stronger than before. The music that carried father and daughter across the dance floor did more than mark the end of a wedding. It marked the quiet triumph of a man whose worth had been hidden too long. There, beneath the glow of chandeliers and the softened murmur of 300 guests, dignity rose above humiliation, and forgiveness eclipsed cruelty. Those who witnessed it will not remember the flowers or the menu, but the moment when truth finally found its voice and restored honor to the one who had been overlooked. The story does not linger because of spectacle, but because of its lesson. A man who had been treated as little more than a pocketbook revealed himself as the very reason life itself had continued. He held no bitterness, raised no angry voice, but chose instead the strength of grace. In doing so, he showed that our measure is never the wealth we display, but the depth of our character when others press us low. How easy it is to misjudge the quiet among us, to mistake patience for weakness, or modest living for insignificance. Yet the truth has a way of returning, and justice, though sometimes delayed, seldom forgets. There is a reminder here for all of us moving through our later years. We know how it feels to be underestimated, to feel invisible in a world that rushes forward without glancing back. But this tale whispers that even when the world seems deaf to our sacrifices, time will carry our story to the surface. And when it does, what shines through is not the mockery we endured, but the dignity we preserved. Like a lamp in the farmhouse window on a winter night, one steady act of kindness can guide not only ourselves, but others through the darkest hours. The heart of the lesson is simple yet enduring. Hold fast to your worth, even when others dismiss it. Stand calmly for what is right, for truth spoken without anger has the power to heal more deeply than revenge. And when wounds are met with forgiveness, new bonds can be formed from the very fractures that once threatened to break us. In this, the story reminds us that the quiet strength of integrity outlasts the noise of cruelty. So take a moment now as the music of this story fades to sit with its meaning. Consider those in your own life whose sacrifices may have gone unseen, and let their worth be honored while it still can be. And if this story has touched your heart, let it travel further. Share its warmth with someone who may be waiting silently to be remembered. For in the end, what we carry forward is not the glitter of chandeliers, but the steady light of truth that teaches us never to judge too quickly, for grace and justice often come from the very places we least expect.